Room tone.
Yep, we got
Hey,
it.
what's up? How's it going, everyone? This is Why We Roll, the tabletop game design podcast from the Stillfleet studio. And as always, we're here. We're Twain. The one host and producer is the mighty.
Oh yeah, that's me, mighty host and producer. Hey, I'm Chris Pickett. What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in again.
Thanks, Chris. And congrats again on Danse Macabre Medieval Horror Roleplaying, which we're now working on actually bringing to life. But
Yeah,
finally,
finishing
yeah,
it up.
you wrote the whole main book. It's great.
Yeah. The book's done. Well, it's not. Well,
Well,
I mean,
we'll do like a
we'll figure it out.
update
Yeah,
episode or something. Yeah.
yeah.
And I,
When is a thing ever actually done? Anyway,
it's done when it's printed, and we can't change the typos. And I'm Wythe Marschall. I'm in charge of typos. And we're very excited to have on a designer whom we really like, and I forget who put us in touch, but we're really happy, Fede, to have made your acquaintance. So we're here with Federico Sohns, RO Kana Media. And what's up, Tony Vicinda in the chat? Big shout out. Hanging out last night playing games. Looking forward to hanging out playing games at PAX Unplugged this week. As of this taping, podcast will come out probably a little after PAX. So Fede, thank you so much for making time to be here with us. And we are
thanks for having me.
And we're really just excited. Or I'm excited just because I know a little about two of your games, Nibiru and Zephyr. So we sort of thought we'd have you on and ask about two games that are kind of cool and interesting and different, and also just anarchism and anarchy in games. There's probably other stuff that you have going on that you want to talk about. We do often start with a sort of at the beginning type question. So I don't know, Chris, do you want to set us up here and kick it off?
Oh my God, I would love to. Hey, thanks, Wythe, for teeing that up. So usually our first question, Fede, is for folks who don't know you, for folks who don't know your work, the things that you're doing over at Araucana Media. Could you just give us a brief intro? Who is Fede? What is Araucana?
Basically an Argentinian TTRPG designer. I've been one full-time for 8 years now. I originally moved to London from here in 2015. And back in the day, I was moving here to London to basically do acting. I studied theater, etc. And I decided I wanted to just do TTRPGs instead. I didn't like the industry back then and in London and stuff. And I just made my first TTRPG, which is Nibiru, a science fiction game about a huge space station. And I was pretty much into the London sort of community, doing the rounds in RP Haven, which was a very small club back in the day. It was a CIC community interest company. I was doing a bit of member representation for the club and getting into the admin stuff of that. And that sort of got me into working for Modifius. So I worked for Modifius Entertainment for a couple of years until 2020. And at the same time, I was doing Nibiru. And I later on did an expansion for that game, Xanadu. And in 2020, during the pandemic, I moved from London to Fukuoka in the south of Japan. And I lived in Japan for about 4 years. And I did Zephyr during those 4 years, the last game I did. And then I came back last year. I came back home. I'm still sort of managing my company in the UK. I did make a TTRPG company, basically the same company in Japan, but I ended up dissolving that company and just keeping the UK one. And
I noticed on the splash page of the website for Araucana, you have Japanese and English as the options for entering, and I was like, oh, I definitely need to ask about that. But you've already answered the question, so there you go.
Do you speak Japanese, Fede, out of curiosity?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Very cool. Awesome. Did you want to say more about from that jump and sort of bring us up to the present?
No, I think that's basically it. It's mainly those two games that I've done. Like I've done, of course, stuff in Modiphius. I've worked in several of their IP lines when I was there, and I think probably it still might be the case that the people that work there, they work on several product lines at the same time. So I was a lot of time in Dishonored for TTRPGs and little bits and bobs of the other like IPs that they manage in TTRPGs. I was a lot of time in their Fallout Wasteland Warfare, so like the war game that is for Fallout. I did a lot of like war game stuff and a bit of like board game stuff too. And like historically, I've played like both war games and board games too. So yeah, that's a little bit more of like background, I guess.
That's a very impressive and interesting resume. So I hope we can get into mostly your games, but I'm also curious. I mean, without no need to get too spicy with Mephidius, but curious about sort of how you've worked on other games and how it all stacks up together.
Yeah, sure.
To go further back, I think we also often start off asking, kind of how you got into games in general. So I'm curious, what was your first love game-wise? What brought you eventually to TTRPGs, but just generally, games?
So my first TTRPG was basically like, I found this like Spanish blog when I was like 13 or 14 or something like that was about like a fictional city. And I was like reading this thing and I had no idea what TTRPGs were. So I was reading this fictional city and it turned out like it was like a whole Spanish website that they had made for like sort of like a homemade Warhammer Fantasy first edition city sort of setting. And I had no idea what that was. And I was just reading this stuff and it was like really cool. And I was like, oh, there's a game for this. I realized that. And I pirated the PDF because everything here, we pirate everything in Argentina. There's no ifs and buts. Basically, like a game is worth like half of my parents' pension in any case for the exchange rate. So there's no alternative. And we took that with like a high school mate and we ran that and we had a lot of fun. And then we never did anything again with TTRPGs until I was like, what's it called? Until I was 21, maybe 20 years old, when a friend at like a call center job sort of like invited me to like a vampire, like a New World of Darkness kind of game. And then I fell back in love with TTRPGs and it never stopped. We played mostly New World of Darkness, but we played lots of games at the time and way more when I just went to London and started doing that sort of stuff.
Cool. So I love the mix of influences there, but I'm curious to hear when we get into Nibiru, especially and Zephyr, like what mechanic, like what has led you to take certain approaches, because they do seem very different. Maybe not like from nowhere, but they're definitely, they're not sort of very obvious clones of anything, right? Which is always great to sort of find real innovation. Chris, did you want to follow up on any of that?
No, I mean, I think my next questions were just going to be to ask Fede if you could give us an introduction to, I guess, first Nibiru. We could go in chronological order with the works that you've put out. But yeah, what is Nibiru? I've read a little bit of the quick start. I think Wythe is maybe a little bit more familiar. But yeah, for folks who haven't read through that, what's the world of Nibiru look like?
So Nibiru is basically a space station. It's a colossal space station the size of Canada, maybe, that is orbiting
That's an awesome
star.
detail.
Yeah. It's orbiting a star in the system Fomalhaut B. It's more of a it's not a very far off system, but anyway, there's people in this space station. They have an entire society within. That is loosely based in like ancient Mesopotamian symbology and the language, etc. And it kind of works as a sort of like colossal sci-fi stand-in for Plato's allegory of the cave, because they can't really leave the space station because it creates artificial gravity through spin. If you know how like artificial gravity through spin works, the further you get out of the center, the heavier the sort of like pull gets. So going towards the end of the station where you would get out from the thing, it would mean you would be experiencing like a horrendous amount of like pressure on you. So they're basically locked inside of that. And like centuries just pass within that space station in like cycles in which the space station shuts down and comes back online, etc. The creatures that live there, mostly they've adapted to that, and they're like bioelectric. They're when I was designing the creatures, I was like thinking back to like classes in high school on electronics and how circuits work, and so like being like, okay, this can be like, maybe this resistor could be like an organ that looks like this, and it's sort of like this. So with that idea, I was like, okay, I have this world which I really like, and I have this theme that I want to talk about, which is identity and memory. So those two combined. So I'm going to make a game about amnesiacs, just wandering about this space station, and recovering memories. And I want it to be like a light rule game that has this journaling thing. Back then, the word journaling, because this is like 2016, the word journaling hadn't catch on that much. There were a few games that did this thing, A Penny for Your Thoughts, or My Thoughts. I can remember the call.
Sure,
name.
yeah.
There was another one, but not many did that thing. And so I did this thing where you had, sort of like memory points pool that represented sort of like the potential to remember, and you would spend that, and you would get to write a memory, and that memory would be associated with like an action, and that could give you like a bonus or a penalty to your rolls. And that's sort of like the gist of it. Most people came in for the setting and how it was depicted, because I hired a lot of artists. I'd spend a lot of time like working overtime to pay those artists, and several years. And yeah, it was pretty catchy. So yeah, that's kind of how it went for Nibiru and what it is in a way.
And what are some stories, like what are the kinds of stories that you've heard told through Nibiru? And I have to admit, like I found out about Nibiru, I think around the time Zephyr launched, and was like the Spider-Man meme, because I also have a game about a giant space station, although not Canada size, but now I do think the unit of Canada is really kind of perfect for things in space.
Yeah, really, it's very evocative.
I've been using Madagascar Narm for some reason, so there's like these kind of
it's not mine. It's Dave Thomabor, a TTRPG reviewer, did that parallel, and I was like, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So shout outs to him.
Shout outs to Dave Thomabor.
So yeah, what was the question again?
Oh yeah, no, I was just thinking through having read Nibiru but not played it, and it is very evocative, and the setting is really magisterial, and the art is dope. So I'm curious, assuming you've played it a bunch of times, play testing it, playing it.
Right.
What are
stories?
Sort of some example stories so listeners can get a sense of the kinds of ways that you're playing with mechanics, and especially memory, right? And the use of memory as like a thing in a game that the play loop centers around, if that makes sense.
So the setting is divided in three sort of like areas, which are like the part that is closer to the core of the station, where artificial gravity is more like on Earth. It's called Antumbra. Then there's Penumbra, and then there's Umbra. So there's different places in which the environment differs because of mainly artificial gravity, and each place lends itself to different sort of stories. So in Antumbra, because it's closer to Earth, you have your big cities in like these huge vaults. So you have more of like political, social sort of games. In Penumbra, there's like an underclass that are extracting resources for the people in Antumbra, and they, live shorter lives. They are sort of like locked into like a pretty shitty currency system, so like market economy that Antombran people designed. So they get trapped there, and there's a lot of like themes also of immigration, which is related to my life, of course. And it's more like struggle and sort of like fight the power kind of thing in Penumbra. And then Umbra is much more about mystery and horror, and so like the things that lie beyond. And how the theme of memory happens, well, of course, there's mechanics like the fact that these vagabonds, which are the name of the characters, they don't know anything, but the rest of the people in the society of like Nibiru, they're just normal people. They have to sort of be careful because there's an organization that is called the Enki's Covenant that is looking for vagabonds, basically, to find you. You're kind of like a persecuted sort of like group as a vagabond. The reason you're persecuted is because Enki's Covenant as an organization sort of like made itself rich or made itself powerful by sort of like litigating the land disputes after like a huge war. And so any sort of like resources that sort of like give you information about the past and about like, oh, who owned this thing, they utilize that, and they have like all sorts of technology to essentially extract that from people. And because vagabonds have like, they're not just like memories of like, you know, oh, happened when I was 10. The archetypes that you have for the vagabonds as characters, they're super wild. They can be like from generations, like super past. They can be memories from animals. They can be memories from machines. Some vagabonds have memories like of actual places. So when you're writing your memory, you're writing on the POV of like, for example, a church and all the people that have been there. Every archetype sort of like gives you a proposal for being like, okay, this is going to be like a creative writing exercise, and you're going to sort of like do this thing. And so the guy that picked the thing where you have the POV of a building, they have to create all of their memories from that point of view. And they have to think, oh, how do I write a memory that, gives me a bonus to convincing someone? Well, maybe if I'm a church, I'm writing from the POV of this air vent, and I feel the airwaves of like this priest that is like giving counsel to someone, and I feel that in a sort of way, and I write about that thing. So it's all about like some like doing this creative exercise about writing memories. And then of course the setting, because of Enki's Covenant, there's a big memory thing going on there. Then the settlements that come as like the samples of like iconic settlements for each zone, they usually have some sort of theme of memory. Ashur, for example, is like this, the empire that used to be that fell and everyone got liberated from them. And they're sort of like struggling about like how to remember the time when they were an empire now that they're fallen. If they're like, oh, let's go back to the glory days, or like, no, let's actually deal with like the horrid history of our nation, etc. So yeah, there's a lot of it around, both in the mechanics and in the setting, that sort of like mesh together there, that theme. So yeah, that's kind of it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really cool, and the world feels so detailed and fleshed out. And I'm always curious too, like when you went into writing Nibiru, what were some of what was some of the stuff you were watching or reading that kind of inspired you as you were kind of coming up with the world? Because I'm getting like little bits of like Solaris, but also what's the book series? Wow, I just had a total brain fart. Sci-fi book series, The Expanse. Thank you. Yeah, The Expanse. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, there's like little bits of Solaris, little bits of Expanse in there. But yeah, what were some of the specific things that you were looking at the time when you were writing it?
The Expanse mainly. It's kind of weird for me with like influences, because The Expanse was probably the most influential thing, and I even got in touch with an organization that did consulting for The Expanse, which is called the Science and Arts Exchange or something like that. They're pretty cool. They're actually like a US funded organization. You can reach out with like questions about your setting, and like a scientist of like a particular area will answer to you, and they'll help you with world building like for free, just like an email. And the Expanse work with them, etc. So and I also work with a friend who is you know, an astronomer, an astrophysicist, sorry, to like bring it together. But yeah, the Expanse was the main thing. You know, aesthetically, it looks quite a bit like Tsutomu Nihei's Buran. Buran is like a manga that is like pretty much this huge like a structure thing.
Yeah.
There's a city that grows, eating away at like mass from like the solar system, and it never stops growing. It's like an algorithmically generated city, and it's pretty much like, it looks kind of like that. But they weren't that influential. The Expanse was probably the most influential because of the idea of an underclass that was sort of like pinned down by gravity and that sort of thing. But yeah, yeah, that's more or less. I wrote like a list of like influences, but to be honest, I was sort of like kind of phoning it in a way, because I just felt pressured at that point to list influences, and to be honest, like most of them are really not fitting in there.
There's like a real pressure to have the appendix in, you know, at the end there.
Yeah, it's an amateur, you know, sort of like mistake. I think the idea that you have to have listed influences, you don't really have to, like, you know.
Yeah, no, there's no rules, but I also think it's interesting how there's, to me at least, it's very perpendicular. It's not always like the Expanse, sure, I guess, is an influence on my sci-fi writing as well, but it's like, I would say it's probably more minimal in terms of a lot of imagery and ideas about characters and stuff. Not that, and I enjoyed watching it in terms of, you know, a consumer experience, but a lot of more influences are sort of weird literary or cinematic, or like just other things that you wouldn't guess, things from history. And we were just saying in the chat, Vex and I were talking about how, you know, you pulled up a lot of lore from sort of the deep past and used that to cue up the far future, which is something I've enjoyed doing as well. And I thought that was an interesting parallel when I found Nibiru, that like you're using these names from Sumer and Babylon and Akkad. So, you know, I don't know if you can, just to build on what Chris had asked, like beyond kind of mass media or like pop or nerd, you know, game influences, do you read a lot of history? Like what led you into you know, into some of these themes and talking about memory? Or is there anything sort of not obvious that you'd want to surface and sort of reflect on from that period of like building out this massive, because
totally.
Baramu is a huge kind of idea. So here you have it, you know, a sort of game version, right? And like what goes into that isn't obvious.
Yeah, no, it's like most of my influences are from nonfiction. I've always read nonfiction, like a lot of social science. Not so much. I was reading a lot of that in London, but not much in like a social way. In Japan, I was much more like partaking into like, I was like co-organizing a Tokyo political reads club, and I was in another club. So I was reading much more in Japan, and mostly drawing from social sciences. And the revisited edition of like Nibiru that I'm gonna do is drawing even more from that, and then from like a particular set of essays and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a much bigger influence to me.
What essays, if you don't mind, Matt, or do you want to keep that close to the vest?
Yes, no, it's fine. It's a series of essays. It's actually a book by a guy called Julian Jaynes, which is called "The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind," which basically talks about how it's a theory about our way of conceiving sort of like consciousness. Just sort of like this sort of like dialogue that we have with ourselves. It's not consciousness in the thing of like being aware of stuff. It's just the way we translate into like words what we think and what we see, being something that was socially constructed and that is tied to the development of language. And he talks about the way in which, like, particularly like talking about like ancient Mesopotamia and that sort of like place, there was something called the bicameral mind, which is sort of like a set of symbols that are then associated to meaning. And these symbols can be voices, can be represented by God figures and divinities, etc. And as language starts to take over and starts to sort of like draw significance and be a different tool for sort of like conveying meaning and understanding the world, it starts to replace that. And that's sort of like, he talks about the formation of the modern consciousness from that point of view. And what I wanted to do with the revisited edition of Nibiru is sort of like take it back to that bicameral mind and be like, okay, your actions are actually influenced by these series of like voices that are symbolized. They have like an icon within the mythology of the station and the peoples in it that are sort of like part of the gameplay. It's a bit weird. I would need to probably like explain it with like an actual like role example, but that's sort of like the thing that I'm aiming for.
No, it's cool. I was saying in the chat, I've never heard anyone but me reference Julian Jaynes in that book, which is, massive or I read it anyway as a book. I'm sure it was published as essays back in the 70s or whatever, but it's a very compelling thesis, and it's interesting that it comes from literature. It's like the one, neuroscience document of a sort that I know of that comes almost purely from someone reading like the Iliad and Gilgamesh and thinking about like why is it that people always talk about hearing the voice of God up to a point and then it stops, and like what would cause that universally? Like that's like an odd sort of it's a little bit of a for people who aren't huge nerds like apparently you and I are, Fede, but it's like a National Treasure, Da Vinci Code, like wait a second kind of moment. But it's very compelling. I mean, Jaynes is a very, very kind of convincing author, and very good writer. So I've always thought it was kind of a curious thing that he was dismissed, as the interviewer just said, well, this is kind of meaningless. And I wonder if there is somewhat of it there in terms of how society, how culture evolved into the social organizations we're used to through a certain period of time, the Bronze Age, sort of universally, where people were hearing the voice of God more directly, and what led to, these loops tightening and changing so that we don't hear God in the same way. And I think there's other sci-fi that kind of gets at this, and the idea of like almost materializing religion, but in a way that seems enchanted, if that makes sense. But I think it's cool to think about in a game what would do that. So I'm curious that the last thing you said, which is you're influenced by this, and what it's going to mean for Nibiru 2.0 is the environment is like pinging your head directly, which in a far future setting could just be also a material thing, but as a character would feel very enchanted and weird, right? So even though I know, and in the same way that right now we're in a liminal space with glass and neural links and just the conspiracy world of me, it's like we're getting to a point where like information is flowing so fast and so furious that we're almost hitting that bicameral or polycameral sort of world of like, holy shit, there's a lot happening, and how do I make sense of it as an individual consciousness? So that's a kind of lot of gobbledygook, but yeah.
I mean, I don't think that like the bicameral thing, it never went away. Like for starters, I do think that generally like politically, beyond the argument of like whether the guy was right or wrong or whatever, I think it's very interesting to talk about like or posit the idea that stuff that we assumed is sort of like deterministic is actually socially constructed. I think it's generally politically empowering to some sort of degree to ask that sort of questions and to posit that sort of thing. But in the game, it kind of like I read the thing while I was thinking about a sort of like twist on task resolution that it fit perfectly, which was very fun. And it's basically, I can, if you have like 3 minutes, I can basically tell you about it.
No, I think let's do a deep dive.
All the 3 minutes in the world. Yeah.
Cool.
We have 3 minutes.
If you take like, for example, I don't know, like your average task resolution process, like the idea is that like a character makes a choice and they roll to see, and they describe themselves how they're doing their stuff. And then we roll to see if it's successful or not. So the twist in this is that you kind of know what you want to do, like what your character is going to do, but the way it's going to be done is determined by the dice. And each number of the dice, which Nibiru uses d4s, which I have in d12 form here in like cuneiform sort of like format. Before it was like in the original Nibiru, it was like you roll 3d4s, and if you see a 4, you succeed. Okay, now that's changed. Now each of these 4 numbers represents one of the voices. So you have like basically 4 so like canonical voices. There's like the shepherd, there's the core, there's the voice of silence, and they all have like this mythology thing that is introduced to players. And they all have different demeanors and different ways about you doing the thing that you want to do. So if you roll like 3d4s and say that you roll like, I don't know, 2 4s and 1 1, right? So the 4 represents, let's say, the voice of the shepherd. And the voice of the shepherd is like, it's an icon that is very authoritative, that always goes to authority to solve stuff. And it's also like very rules based. Like if our character is trying to, for example, break off a fight between like 2 merchants or something like that, and I pick the 2 4s, they will probably in the demeanor of the shepherd, they will try and go and appeal to a higher authority. They'll go like, you know what, let's talk to the judge in this town and see what they say, or something like that. And the more results you get from the thing that you picked, the better you succeed at it. So you can pick any number. You can pick any of the voices when you roll the dice, even if they don't show in the dice roll. They could have picked a 2 and it's not showing. But I would have had like a dramatic failure or something like that if I had done that. If it showed up once, like for example, this one, say that it's the voice of silence, that is like very calm and so like peaceful, and it's probably trying to mediate between these guys in a very sort of like Gandhi-esque way, where I'm just going in and trying to, let's just like slow things down. This would be like a failure with an opportunity kind of thing. And this is a success. So the 2. So going to appealing to the authority of the local guy with the shepherd voice would net me a success, right? The thing is, why would I want to fail? You might ask yourself. Well, you might want to fail because, well, first of all, because maybe you don't want your character to showcase this personality. Maybe you have a different idea for your character. Then at the same time, whenever you make a roll, you tick down a track that starts to take you down to a path where you're sort of like listening to this voice more and more, and you start to unlock shit that is tied to that voice. So I wanted to have this thing where the voices are represented by the number of the dice. Every dice roll posits an interesting choice. The idea that you might choose to fail or to succeed, I wanted to play with that. I think that's always an interesting idea to play about. And and sort of fleshing out this sort of like bicameral mind thing through mechanics and building this sort of like tree where you start to advance through like different stages of your engagement with that voice, and how maybe some voices like you might spec into a particular voice, and at the same time you will find that another voice becomes antagonistic to you. So you actually start to have issues when that number pops up in your rolls, and especially if you want to use that number. So I'm playing around with that kind of stuff.
Nice, like a Greek chorus, but different sort of social realities are pushing back, and they have material consequence. So I like the dice can mediate that, and you can kind of choose a path there. Chris, sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, I was just agreeing. I was also thinking of Greek choruses, or even, I was also thinking I was thinking about Disco Elysium again, where you have these different aspects of the self that are speaking to you, and like how that's a really interesting exploration of the bicameral mind. But like, no, I love that it's tied to this larger mythology. It's also tied to like the material reality of the station itself, I'm imagining. And yeah, it's just both the social and kind of like material, spatial influence that has on your decision making. I also think it's fascinating to play around with the idea that players would choose to fail at a roll or at an action in a game. Like I've never really even considered that as a possibility. I guess you see it in some PPTA stuff where you can have these interesting mixed results, but there's still not that level of agency where it's like, well, actually in this situation, I want to fail this role, either because narratively it's interesting, or like you're saying, I want to build my character. I want to embody my character in a very specific way. And it's not jiving with the inputs that I'm getting from the world around me at this moment.
Yeah, it's I call it means-based task resolution, because you're more worried about the means than the actual end. It's like, if you think about it, if the task resolution role is as it usually is, and it's also usually the foundation of most systems, like the thing that you build everything on top of, you generally are talking about ultimately power fantasies. You're mechanizing power fantasies, because the core question of everything you're doing is whether I can do it or not. And in this case, it's not so much that. It's like, do I want to do this in this way? Or maybe should I keep to my morals and, maybe I'll fail at this, but I'll stick to like my convictions and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's really compelling. It's really compelling.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things about Jaynes' thesis and close reading of literature. And if you think about characters in D&D, it's a different way to take on that whole. We've talked on the show here, Chris, and I'm sure Fede, you're familiar with the origins of Gygaxi and D&D, and this law, order, chaos, and neutrality. Kind of like, it's a batshit way of like avoiding having to talk about a Christian or Muslim or other god, but also not actually getting into polytheism in a real meaningful way, which we've had on like Dr. Erica Bridges and talked about like actual polytheism. But so that sort of 70s like law chaos divide, it's interesting because you have characters who are inherently one or the other, but then they still have antagonistic relationships with beings that in the Vancian, fantasy are actually, we know, are like Cthulhu, right? They're not anything like an Abrahamic god. They are godlike in their power, however, and they do grant real boons, which creates, unlike in the material world that I have experienced, I can't actually get a boon from either Abrahamic Yahweh or Cthulhu.
You gotta pray harder.
I know.
You gotta get your boons up.
I know, Chris. I'm just really, I'm really bad at it. But you can't get your boons. But and if you could get your boons, you would actually have a weird kind of situation like you're saying. So it's interesting to transpose that from fantasy to sci-fi. And I don't know that I've heard someone doing it mechanically as you're describing with the dice and the environment, but it makes sense. And it actually is a nice mechanicalization of stuff that, again, I feel like it comes up in the games I run where like the environment is, I like to think, rich with like weird signals, but it's not, it's usually on the player. It's like, you tell me if you want to interact with it. And I like that you're making it so basic to the system that you have to interact all the time with the giant space station that of course is full of EM waves and just like shit, like millions of years of detritus of like human imagination and machines and like evolving slimes and like all that stuff is putting pressure on you. So I think it's fantastic, and I definitely want to play it. I do want to ask some about just in terms of time. I want to make sure we talk about Zephyr, and also like what are the plans for Nibiru. So I don't know, Fede, if you want to end on what's happening in Nibiru and jump to Zephyr for a bit and talk about that game and some of your.
No, let's talk Zephyr, and there's some more stuff to talk about aside from those two for the future. But yeah,
great,
cool.
So yeah.
Well, why don't you tell us? So what is Zephyr? And I definitely have a few questions. And it's another game that I will just say for podcast listeners, you should check out for the art. And it's very different than Nibiru,
beautiful,
but very interesting. And again, I feel like even at the level of art, which is, I think this is hard to do, it does not look like anything else. Like it stands out in my like PDF library. It's like very easy to find as, oh, that one. Like Zephyr, right? The weird like, oh boy, like so I have a million questions about, from art alone, the world building. It doesn't fit neatly into sort of science, fantasy, what is this? So but why don't you start? And I'm really curious, Fede, in your own words, like what is Zephyr and how does one sort of engage with it?
Sure. So Zephyr is an anarchist fantasy game about essentially a group of people called the Windfolk. And this group of people live on top of a colossal sentient landmass. The landmass is called Off-Boy, And one day they depart from their communities, which are found at the periphery of this walking continent, to sort of like go on a journey that is kind of like a coming of age journey, but it's also a huge sort of like ritual in which they tighten the bonds of their community. They sort of like go and fulfill these grand obligations. And it is in a way a game that attempts to convey the way peoples outside of state boundaries have existed and have created social institutions and like. It's very much informed by a lot of so like the anthropology of stateless societies and a lot of work on living beyond state capture, and also on the origin of states. And it's also pretty weird because the Zephyr, the titular thing, is a substance, which is the thing that the Windfolk conceive the world to be made of. It's a substance that comes in 4 colors: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And you're playing with those colors physically with like tokens of those colors. Those colors are what make your body. So you have in your character sheet, you have a place that says Constitution, and you place tokens there, and that's what you're made of. If you ran out of those tokens, you die. And the entire game has mechanically, I think, a very powerful sort of like evocation of what it means to inhabit an interconnected ecosystem, because these sort of like tokens that make you who you are, you're expending them as you like, spend your energy and push forth through, the wild places of Ophoi and face dangers, etc. You're taking them out of your sheet and you're replenish them as you hunt and so like eat that Zephyr back into you. So it's a survival game that has a lot of like themes of ecology and the interconnectedness of life. And yeah, that's basically Zephyr in a very quick pan sort of way.
No, that's great. And then, I mean, to get into, I guess, the politics of the world building itself. So you have, your kind of player characters and the societies that they're from. You talk about this idea of like grand obligations, right? And kind of even in the very front of the book, the version that I have at least, you talk a lot about the difference between obligations and debt. This kind of other society called the salt states. Can you talk about the relationship between the player characters and the salt states?
Yeah, sure. So the salt states are a society that's at the center, the geographical center of Ophoi. So if the Windfolk happen to live in the periphery and very rugged places, etc., and full of like huge old growth forests, the salt states exist in this valley, which is pretty plain and at the center of Ophoi. And they have a society built on debt, which is different from obligation. So an obligation, a debt in a way, is an obligation that can be quantified. So you can put an exact number on it. And because you can quantify it, it's impersonal. You can give it to someone else. Not in the same way in which obligation works. Like, for example, if I tell Chris, oh, Chris, let's just go and watch, I don't know, let's go watch a movie like this Saturday.
Sure.
I can't hand that to someone else. I can be like, oh, I won't be able to go there. Go with, I don't know, my friend Matt. It's like, you don't even know him. And like, we're maybe trying to get to know each other. So that's kind of like an obligation. Like debt is different. And I wanted to sort of like have this contrasting society that is very hierarchical versus the horizontal sort of like way in which Windfolk societies are constructed, and that is based on debt, on salt debts, to a very exaggerated degree. For example, in the salt states, the currency that is used to account for debt is salt. The bodies of the people are made of salt. Their net value is weighted in salt in a way. Their name, the names that they have, is an actual accounting device. Like if they at some point if they want to at some point basically do a sort of like mortgage on their life, their name changes, like a new letter is added, like an R is added. Normally they don't use the R in a Windfolk speech. Well, the salt states have like a component, which is an R, that gets added to your name to account that you defaulted on your life. And so you get like a loan that is equal to your weight in salt. So it is like, it's a sort of like horrifying capitalist nightmare space. But the salt states aren't like, the people of the salt state aren't bad because of like them just being bad. They're trapped within a system that sort of like promises this idea of the universal jubilee. They're all working towards this ultimate goal. Their societies working towards this goal, where the moment where one of the salt lords takes power, and by taking power owns all debts, they will just abolish everything and everyone will be free. But of course, no one is going to do that willingly, and you might believe that your lord is better than the other lord that is next to you. And so it creates this constant infighting, and so it talks about the historical ramifications of debt and how closely it is tied to mass violence and, you know, state capture, etc. So that's sort of like what the salt states are. And it's, I think they're very powerful as antagonists. These are not people you're meant to fight against. They literally break the rules of the game. If you find a salt state hero, you should be running, because getting hit by them means you'll be dropping tokens on your sheet and puncturing your sheet. And if they slash at you, you're cutting literally your sheet across the line. So that's something like an interesting bit of mechanical thing I wanted to do, where I separated the systems of violence into two mechanics. So there's the normal natural violence that comes from, for example, hurting yourself or falling off a tree or something, where you just lose tokens. But heroic violence, which is the violence that is inflicted upon you systematically by these people, has an ideology behind. And that means that it cannot be translated within the form that the Windfolk have of conceiving the world into just losing tokens. So your sheet gets torn to shreds. It's basically an impossibility of Windfolk even being able to conceive how this violence would be possible. So that's sort of like the salt states, and that's their guess and how they relate to the Windfolk.
That's great. I love the tactility of these gentle souls. Just their sheets getting ripped up left and right. I have to ask. I mean, there's so much to ask about. You know, so it's an anarchist game, and I know you mentioned sort of stateless societies, and there's this sort of idea of they're very sentimental. They're kind of consuming sentiment. They're nomads, and as you say, they're not even capable of certain forms of violence, which also to me implies they're not capable of certain forms of resistance to sort of territorialization. You know, the formation of the state. So I'm curious, kind of how are there any sort of any historical analogs you're playing with, or utopian kind of ideals that you wanted to draw out? Anything that this is meant to invoke or is kind of inspiring it? So either going in or kind of coming out, you know, of the machine of the game from real politics, or is it really very jumbled up and dreamlike? And I mean this with no, you know, it's not a leading question. I'm just generally curious, kind of where you're coming from when you say it's an anarchist game.
Yeah, no. So it's an anarchist game because it's drawing on really just a jumbled mash of like social institutions that we've seen in like plenty of like peoples around, like the Nambiquara, the Tiv. There's a lot of concepts that get mixed around, and a lot of them are not really just the, you know, the cultural ownership of any one nation. Like, for example, moiety structures in which one group cannot perform a specific task and depends on another group to, for example, bury their dead or something like that. And that makes it so that communities get bound in a particular manner. Or seasonality, the idea that in one season our society works this way, but in winter, actually it turns into a different form of society, which is maybe more hierarchical, because we want like a direct structure that can easily like direct people to like do the stuff that we need to survive through winter or some stuff like that. I wanted to show the way like these societies are dynamic. I also wanted to share the fact that like stateless societies, not being entrapped in, you know, a state structure, are constantly changing. There's people within the game that are going to have different ideas about how much they like these institutions that they're sort of like partaking in. Part of character creation is going through the myths in comic book form, and you deciding whether your character believes in this myth or is maybe sort of like hazy or is actually against the idea of what this myth represents, of, for example, how we treat the creatures that we live with, or how we regard the threat of the salt states, etc. So I wanted them not to be like one-dimensional, like be like, you know, stateless societies, they're all like very different. They all have their different things. And even within each society, as small as these groups are, there's going to be people with as differing points of views as we have in our own societies. So that's more or less it, I think, on that part.
That's cool. It's a game. It falls in the category of game that I've read, I've not played, and I find it hard to imagine exactly what the play experience would be, which is, again, kind of, I think, a good thing, because I think there's lots of games, even if they're really cool games, it's kind of easy to imagine, like, oh, well, it'll play kind of like this, or I'll probably enjoy it, you know, I'll goof off, we'll do an epic thing, whatever. And I think this game is challenging people along some different lines. And also, it is a podcast, but you should really check out the art. It just looks very, very different. It's sort of got these earth tones. The people are almost like seed people, the windfolk. So there's not a lot of humanity here in a good way. It feels very alive, but it's not green and it's not human. And I feel like often there's this impulse to do either humans, machines, robots, or green, which is cool. But you've done this thing of like brown gray, but it's very vibrant and involute and full of little flourishes of like, it's clearly an organic institution, you know.
And I learned art to draw the game, so
wow,
it was really cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, you know, we've been gushing over the art, and we haven't actually pointed out that you are the illustrator for Zephyr, and yeah, it really is beautiful. And I like what you were saying, Wythe, about how, like, you know, I think that there is this, there's a tendency to like aesthetically be like, okay, well, it's going to be like industrial and humans and bad, or it's going to be nature and green and bright and fresh and all this kind of stuff. But like the world's not a binary, right? Like it doesn't make sense. And like we can land somewhere in the middle. And it has this very like the look of the book has this very like autumnal feel to it, where it feels like things are in motion, things are kind of changing in a really positive way. And for Zelda fans in the audience, I will say a lot of the characters look like cooler, more interesting Koroks, is what I'll say. Little seed guys.
It reminds me a little of Dark Crystal too, which I still think is probably more on that binary, which again of that moment, 60s, 70s. This is already into the 80s, Henson, but you know, it's kind of got the green good, desert bad. But I think Dark Crystal at least was a more interesting visual world. And I think you here have one that is just completely implodes it. So it's all sort of like living autumnal rock seed people. There's like sort of creatures that are also beautiful, but it's clear when they're creatures versus when they're windfolk. And again, it's just sort of a book that's worth sort of leafing through from the perspective of designing an RPG that is like I sort of pitched it as, it's clearly not going to fall in a genre that you expect, which makes it, I think, worth sort of engaging with, and is I think hard to do in an era when we just have tons and tons of versions of high fantasy or kind of grimdark.
And there was a thing that you had mentioned, Wythe, which I forgot to state. Like windfolk are not like utopian in any way. In terms of like themes of anarchism, they clearly have lots of issues. Like it's something that you're going to find in the book. Like there's 4 clans, and you get to pick one of those clans, and they're separated for reasons. Some clans do not partake in the same, rituals that other clans have. They are, and this might sound weird if you have more or less an idea of what anarchism is, they are generally monarchies, or maybe they have kings, but they don't work as what you would call a traditional, European monarchy works. It works very much. It's similar to what is called the sacred, I think it's the sacred royalties of the Shilluk, like the Shilluk people. And royalty has a very specific sort of like social function in this case. With royalty, I mean the king. And a theory by David Graeber and his mentor, Marschall, two big anthropologists, spelled out in the book called On Kings, which is Stranger Kings, Stranger Kingship. And they kind of have this thing. So they have kings, they have a particular class that is meant to source kings, and that class is sort of like always a point of contention within Windfolk society, and their politics toward kings separate them from one another. So at the same time, you do have this very horizontal society with very, social institutions that we're not used to knowing. But at the same time, they have things that I think any reader could be reading this and be like, oh, this is not a utopian at all. This is fucked up, sort of thing. So that was like a thing that I wanted to add to that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I think that's something that we're probably going to run out of time, but we might have to have you back on to talk about representing politics and machines for politics in games, and how do you get people to engage in politics, and what's fun about it, right? When is it fun, and how do you make it not didactic? And clearly here, again, just it's not didactic, right? It doesn't feel like you're reading David Graeber, although I love David Graeber. It feels like you're playing little guys, if anything, kind of a Henson-like, weird fantasy universe, but you are, to your point, exploring these different ways of circulating debts, cooler ring stuff, and you're doing versions of sort of pre-state, smaller formations. How do smaller societies kind of function, and what is it? Is it anarchism? Is it quote unquote, are they primitive social formations or post something, or how do they oppose or resist? So I think there's a lot we could get into in sort of a different version of this podcast that's closer to like
another roundtable idea.
Another round. I think we might be doing a roundtable or something. But
we have to. We have to at some point. I actually, this is a bit of an aside. I just edited our Hypermall Unlimited Violence episode earlier today, so that's coming out in the past if you're listening to this now. Whoa. But we talked specifically about doing a roundtable around malls and why they make such great TTRPG campaign settings. So yeah, we'll definitely have to have gaming politics is definitely one of them, and then the undying legacy of malls as the second one. Yeah,
the necro, the mall as lich, as architectural lich. And maybe, Fede, we can have you on, because I view myself as very much in the tradition of like Marxism, Leninism, and anarchism's always this kind of cousin that in theory is it hasn't quite worked. There's this high point in the Spanish Civil War, but I think it'd be cool to do sort of a discussion about different traditions and what kinds of games evoke different social formations, and just how it plays at the table, really, because that's something I'm really, really interested in, is how do people who don't care about any of this shit enjoy the games. So I feel like that we could do a whole nother thing about sort of how you've run this, and ways that the tokens and the groups of Windfolk kind of interact. And as you say, it's not a utopia. It's not easy. It's hard out there for a little guy. Before we run out of time, though, I think we should ask, and Chris, if you have other questions, please pile them on. But I wanted to ask Fede to really just focus on what is coming out, what's next. Sounds like Nibiru 2, and any news, anything you want to share, shout out, get excited about. But yeah,
sure. So right now I'm pretty lazy on design. The whole tariffs thing is not very motivating. So I'm kind of stepping back for a couple of weeks from that. But I do have a series of projects that I have there. First is Nibiru. The revised edition is going to come out first, of course. Then I have 2 books for Zephyr. which I'm very leisurely just like typing away whenever I feel like, because it's at this point it's very easy for me to like write stuff for Zephyr. So there's a supplement that expands on the game with the water folk and how they coexist also in the periphery and their own myths, etc. And a book that is about playing as a hero of the Salt States. And that one is like really much more of a design challenge because I'm porting over a mechanic from Disco Elysium into the game to make this thing. And I'm really trying to tackle a thing that I think is really cool, which is generally if you look at like games like D&D or like your standard thing, like the question of violence is always a technical question, is whether you can kill the thing or not. And it's never asked about like, well, if I gave you a pistol and I told you I'll give you money if you go kill this guy, of course you wouldn't do it. Well, the reason why you wouldn't do it is because you don't have like this, stack of ideological sort of like bits that ease you into killing someone for money. So I want to make a system in which you're building a guy whose capability for killing someone for money, which you tend to do in D&D, basically is built ideologically. Like your gun and your thing doesn't really have much impact. The ideology and the way you sort of like frame the other, it does. And it's super mechanized, and you're building this horrifying piece of shit that can actually go and kill people for money. And I think it's actually quite important because to sort of like put out there and kind of start maybe a conversation about it, because all of that horrid stuff is sort of like baked or baked in, or so like it's a thing that already exists and it's taken as granted. Whereas, at least in my society, the idea of having a fantasy about going out and killing someone for money is horrendous. And, one has to spend a lot of time thinking about how come someone would find that even like a far-fetched possibility of it being a thing. So I'm mechanizing like the thought cabinet from Disco Elysium, the idea that you have thoughts or ideas that you first come into contact and eventually you internalize, and these building blocks that become internalized make it easier for you to create this image of the other that is easy to kill. So that's pretty much what I'm playing with. And then there's two other projects which are very far off, and I'll just mention by passing. One is a project that is called It Will Rain for a Million Years. It's a collaboration with a paleo artist, called Douglas Henderson. He's a great artist from the south of the US. And it's basically you playing an Eoraptor at the dawn of the Triassic. And it is extremely weird. You're playing a dinosaur, and I'm mechanizing a lot of like the world of perception of like an animal at that time. It is called like that because it happens during a thing called the Carnian pluvial episode, where it literally rained for 2 million years.
Dude, shut up and take my money. Just like, take my money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It is also very pretty because all of these like black and white, sort of like incredibly detailed works by Duke are going into this thing. And it's very experimental. So this is one of those things that I need to catch people with the art and then launch them into this very strange game that is played in like a sort of like square lined thing where you're putting rocks and drawing the outline of your identity and doing some sort of like puzzle thing. It's very weird mechanically, but the premise is pretty punchy, I think, and the art is too. So we'll see how it goes. And there's another game which is a rhythm-based TTRPG, which is about dancing. And
wait! We can't just slide over that. What?
Yeah, can I be a dinosaur in the rhythm?
Yeah,
game?
so
I think that's yeah.
The game The game is called Cloud9, and it's basically the premise is a guy basically plugs a Spotify playlist onto a radio telescope, and the fleet of aliens discover music through that thing, and they sort of like reshape their entire alien ship fleet into a party fleet, and they start doing dance-offs within it. And the main pull, aside of like the wackiness of the premise, is that your party is a dance crew, and they're trying to raise their fame and their reputation in this fleet. And the mechanic is very fun, because what you do is you play a song, any song, and you have a judge in front of you that you have to convince that your dance moves are actually cool. And you have to have a dance crew leader who sets the beat of the song and plays cards. And when they play a card, your companion next to you, they have to then play on the next beat a card of the same, what's it called in English?
Same suite?
Suit.
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 Not sweet.
Suit, yeah. Whatever. And so on and so forth. And if you don't have a card of that suit, you have to put your card face down, and so the next player goes. And we've play tested this several times, and it's been extremely fun and chaotic. And you're then adding up those numbers, and it'll tell you how the judge sees your performance. And you're building your dancer to I have different dance styles because I love dancing. I have done a dancing in the past and still do to some degree. So I have each suit representing different styles of dance, so you can spec into shit. Your hearts might be like more your like shuffling or your house style, etc. So
this is great. This reminds me of
the stuff that I have.
Transgender deathmatch legend, with the different suits being different ways of wrestling.
Yeah.
So I like that you're taking that into the world of dance. So it's no longer, it's sort of abstracting the violence to it's not, what do you mean violence? It's the opposite. It's using our bodies for this kind of negotiation of social and cultural things, but it's not violent at all. We do have one last question from Vex in the chat, who, if you don't know, Fede, I think you and Vex would get along too. Just my guess there. Genuine question: do you build the crew as a mechanically separate thing from the characters who are in it? I want that in the way games sometimes let you build a ship. So is your crew also mechanicalized of dancers?
Yes. Yeah. The crew is mechanicalized. Yeah, of course. They have their identity, like they're sort of like tagged, because you will be tagging the walls and the ships and stuff like that. So that's sort of
like you do when
this
you're
game
in a
is
dance crew.
very far off, by the way, though.
This is great.
From everything I've listed, this
is utopian. I love that the four elements make it out to the aliens, and somehow they missed all the shit before then, all the worthless crap, and they just start their sort of communication with Earth around break beats and just having a good time. Well, this is great, Fede. I feel like we could talk again. We really will have to have you back on. I think maybe next season, as we look at 2026, if you have time, we'd love to kind of continue this discussion and talk about some even deeper in some of the politics, some of the mechanics, just cool ideas all around. Chris, any last questions? Or should we throw it to Fede to close it out?
Oh well, my last question. Actually, I do have I have a real last question before we do the fake last question. I'll do them both. Well, first, something, Fede, that I just completely forgot to ask earlier. Why CMYK for the elements in Zephyr? Is it like in my mind? It's like, oh, it's a love letter to book printing or something like that, but I don't know. But yeah, is there a specific reason that you chose CMYK, not RGB, not whatever other color theory combinations are out there?
Right. So I wanted four. I wanted four colors on the first hand, and then when I went on to draw the illustrations, I didn't want to be limited by that thing. Say that I was like, okay, this shade of brown, this shade of green, this shade of red, and this shade of yellow. So I would have to basically make all of the illustrations like that. And I was like, if I'm doing CMYK, it means I can do anything. and I don't have to care about this restriction, and I can do all of the art in this way. So it's like, sure, let's do CMYK. It fits. It's a nice allegory to, printing, and the idea that it could be a printed world in a way. So yeah, that's basically why.
I love that. Yeah, that's perfect color theory thinking. That's really beautiful. Okay, final question. Fede, where can folks find you? What are your pluggables? How can we best support you out there on the wild world of the internet?
Oh my God, I have everything. I have a Patreon, which is Oricana Media, as far as I can recall. Oricana Media.
And we'll link everything in the show notes, of course.
Yeah. I think it's you'll find it in my Blue Sky. My Blue Sky is Sohns, FSOHNS. You can find me on TikTok. I'm there also with Oricana Media. Oricana Media is a TikTok. I'm in YouTube now, uploading stuff here and there, like very lazily, but mostly on TikTok now. And yeah, and Blue Sky and TikTok are my main things. I'm also on Instagram, etc. The Patreon is also a cool resource. There's, if you're a designer, actually, there's pretty good resources there on commissioning and licensing art and the process of art making, stuff about mailing lists and stuff that's also free to access there. And then, of course, there's my mailing list. And if you go to oricana.com, that's my mailing. That list is, and where you can buy my games and all that stuff. Yeah.
Oh,
well, yeah, with that, sorry, I just said cool. With that, I think, Fede, do you have any last thoughts for us? Otherwise, I think we're going to close it out and just thank you again and tell everyone to check out your work, which we'll post links to, and ask you to come back, after the winter break.
Yeah, that's fine. That's awesome. Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for making time, and solidarity. And I hope you're doing well. I hope you enjoy a lovely next few months. And I'm very curious to see about all your games, from Nibiru 2 and the bicameral mind kind of glow up of the D4 system to Dancing Raptors, or sorry, Dancing Aliens and raptors who are at the edge of sort of intelligence and discovery. This is great. These are really deep themes. These are things we love talking about. So it's really been wonderful to have you on.
Yeah.
Same.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for watching and listening later. But you don't know it's later if you're listening. You're just listening to it when it is. That's been Why We Roll. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.